went to all the museums in London that had glass instruments, and I was told by Victoria Albert Museum that I really needed to go to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where they had a whole museum of musical instruments, and they invited performers to play the ancient instruments. So I called up the curator. I had a very short time before I had to fly back home, and he got very excited. He said he'd been there for 20 years and had never met a glass player. And he said, "I've got 3 glass instruments that are 200 years old. Come up and play them." So that's what I did, and it was really quite amazing. The unfortunate thing about those instruments is that they're very similar to the one that the DAR Museum here has, which is called the harmonicon. Made of very fine crystal with a resonating chamber. Obviously, they had a connection between Francis Hopkinson Smith, who built that instrument in Baltimore, and Scotland. I don't know what it was, but it was almost identical to the same one that I played not only at the DAR Museum. I had a jam with that instrument, and also I jammed with one at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit. And each glass would ring for 30 seconds. It was the most elegant, useless sound I've ever run onto in my life. But it was great seeing what they tried to do, and that's the reason why glass playing disappeared, is because the crystal rang too long, you couldn't control it, it became totally unusable, so they just stopped making them. But ordinary glass, the English made ordinary glass like this in the 18th century. So I played one of those, which is at the Corning Glass Museum. It's 250 years old, and very, very similar to this. My timbre is more even. I have a much more even sound throughout. But that's, I think, according to more modern glass making techniques. But I was amazed at how well they did 250 years ago on glass, when the art form is a little over 300 years old. So I was quite impressed with that and quite excited to try it. So, so here's a tune that Richard Puckridge may have played 300 years ago, and he played it in Dublin, and they invited him to London, and they wouldn't let him go. So he stayed the rest of his life in London playing his glass harp. It was called musical glasses in the 18th century, although the Germans called it Glasharp or glass harp. And so there were many names going back. There were also Welsh glass players. Since a lot of my cousins come from Wales, I got to find out whether any of them plays glass. Anyway, here's